Welcome back, everybody. This is Parker Hurley. We're going through every NFL team preparing for their 2026 offseason. We're on to the eighth overall pick in the draft. So, quarter way through here with the New Orleans Saints. Check out the first 7 videos I did on my YouTube page and continue to watch for the other 24 teams coming after this. We go through questions that I asked in May after the draft. I wrote articles asking questions. We're going to answer them now that the season's over, and then we're going to go create some questions that we hopefully have answered by the time the draft is over. So the first question I had was, will Tyler Shuck start week 1? I said, despite the fact that he's a second-round pick, there's really no reason why he shouldn't start week 1. Obviously, I ended up being wrong in that regard, but I still think I was pretty much right in that Shuck was better than Spencer Rattler. Maybe buying Shuck that time ended up being good for him, but I thought that at his age, he was a little bit more ready-made than some of these other guys. I compared him to Ryan Tannehill coming out of the draft, and I think in the first year, I really like that comparison still. And he played 9 games this season, 10 interceptions or 10 touchdowns, 6 interceptions, pretty good completion rate. They were 5-4 in the games he started, looked pretty good compared to how things started at the beginning of the season. I think they were 5-4 with him, and then 1-6 with Spencer Rattler, or 1-7 with Spencer Rattler. So obviously the team, and they started to lose pieces such as Shaheed, injuries to other pieces with Shuck, so they had a better roster with Rattler, and we're still playing a lot better with Shuck. So I think they move into the second season of Tyler Shuck feeling pretty excited. And then I said, do they have enough playmakers is my second question. I talked about how Brandon Cooks being an actual significant piece of their offense wasn't going to cut it for them. And that Shaheed was coming off of an injury. They ended up trading Shaheed. Cooks is playing in the playoffs on the Buffalo Bills right now. So things did end up shaking out that they just simply didn't have enough playmakers. They traded for Devon Vele, but Vele, this was after the article I wrote, Vele really didn't, live up to expectations or meet expectations or become that second threat. So Chris Olave led the way, had an excellent season. Jawan Johnson was the second pass catcher and was fine for, he should just be a complimentary tight end. That should be his role, a good pass catching tight end, but complimentary at that. And he was the number 2 piece in this offense, and it just simply wasn't enough. So it goes back to Shuck. When they traded Shaheed, they didn't have any of they only had Chris Olave in terms of their actual top 3 receivers on paper, and he still managed to look pretty good. So the optimism is pretty high on Shuck because of that. And I think I was correct that the Saints skill players really, really killed their chances this season. Then I said, can Devin Neal push Kendre Miller to be the second running back? And I said that Kamara is going to have to lead the way, but Kendre Miller showed nothing in his first couple seasons. It's a new coaching staff. Although Devin Neal's a late round pick, he could be one of the 6th round picks that gets a lot of carries. He did end up with more carries than Kendre Miller, but it was 57-41. Neither of them lived up to expectations. Both of them suffered injuries. Unfortunately for Neal, it looked like he started to find himself for a few weeks towards the end of the season, but he suffered another injury. So I was kind of correct on that Neal ended up being an impact player despite being such a late pick, but then he got hurt when he got his opportunity. So that's unfortunate. I said, who starts at left guard? All the other spots on the offensive line were locked down to start the season, and then Trevor Penning versus Dylan Raduns. And they ended up trying Penning, moving on from him pretty quickly and swinging him over to the LA Chargers. And good trade for the Saints because he did absolutely nothing for the Chargers. He's shown that he's probably just not an NFL player. His first couple years, he showed he's not a tackle. Now he's showing he's not a guard. He's showing he's not fit for multiple teams. So it did end up being Dylan Raduns, but when you move forward, that wasn't good enough, and they still need a left tackle. And then they ended up having some, injury issues to a couple of the other positions. And so the offensive line just simply wasn't as set, and it ended up, did left guard hold them back necessarily? No, but was it an issue along with all the other issues? Yeah, absolutely. So that ended up being correct for sure. Can the Saints get enough pass rush? I said, Chase Young has been good. They re-signed him. He hasn't lived up to expectations. Carl Granderson's good in a rotation. Cameron Jordan's getting older. I still think Carl Granderson's good in a rotation. Cameron Jordan, I think, is done with the New Orleans Saints. But Chase Young was amazing, so much better than I ever could have thought. He lived up. This is what you thought he was going to be when he was a first-round pick or a top pick in the NFL draft. So, uh, I I guess you could say, they did get enough, especially because Chase Young overshot my expectations. So, the answer to my question is that Chase Young really was significantly better than I could have imagined. Then I talk about who can the Saints' second cornerback be. You figured that they had two of the spots locked down, but was it going to be Quincy Riley on the outside across from Kool-Aid McKinstry, or was it going to be somebody like Isaac Yiadom or something like that? And yeah, it ended up being Quincy Riley. So, and Quincy Riley ended up playing very well. A mid-round pick for their cornerback room ended up really fitting that team. So their secondary, Alontae Taylor will be a free agent, but their outsides, Kool-Aid was up and down, but the ups are so high with him. He looks like, he's like a year or two away from he could be a star. And then Quincy Riley had a pretty good rookie season, so you're feeling good about the Saints cornerback position. So that was my position by or my my five questions from May. Now here's my position by position breakdown real quick. Tyler Shuck is obviously going to be the starting quarterback next year. The question to me is whether Spencer Rattler will be the backup. A lot of people, despite the fact that he was 1-7 and had better skill players than Tyler Shuck, some people seem to think that he was playing like starter capable level. I just never saw that I don't know, maybe I was watching different video than a lot of people who watch Rattler. I think the Saints, would maybe be fine with him as a backup. Maybe they would want a little more experience in their backup role. And like I said, if there is buzz around Rattler that, he started those 8 games and wasn't awful, then they should try and get whatever they can for him. Running back's going to be so interesting because they obviously are bringing Kamara back, and this seems like the last year of Alvin Kamara. And, he isn't like a full-time player, but who's going to be that other guy? They have Kendre Miller, like I said, this is the end for him, and he hasn't lived up to expectations. They have Devin Neal, and while he got a little bit of chances and you could feel a little bit optimistic about him, he's a 6th round pick who had 57 rushes in his first year. That's not like you go into the season saying, well, we have Kamara and Devin Neal. We're feeling really good about that. And then they have Audric Estime, who ended up finishing the season as a starter because they really had nobody else in that spot. So they have 3 guys under contract, and they could just not do anything at running back and assume that could work because Kamara is pretty talented himself, especially considering they have other needs. They also could look at it and say Kamara's getting old and none of these other guys could handle any sort of workload if anything happened to Kamara, and then in the future beyond Kamara. So they could want to do something about that. Chris Olave has 1 year left on his deal. It seems like an obvious extension candidate. And he had a great year to do it. He's coming off of his best season, and now he's a huge fit with Tyler Shuck. There's no way you disrupt that chemistry. He obviously fits in the Kellen Moore offense after his first year with him. So that's an obvious thing. And then when you look at it, if you don't extend Olave, like they're so dry at wide receiver. I know that they just traded for Vele and Jalen Polk, and Polk missed his whole season with an injury. So and they knew that when they traded for him. So they're more optimistic about what he can be this year, and that's why they traded for him. And they still might not be done on Vele, but they need at least one more like significant investment in wide receiver, whether it be a free agent or it'll probably be like a 2nd round pick at wide receiver. They really need someone to come in here. Tight end's going to be really interesting because Taysom Hill and Foster Moreau are both free agents. Taysom Hill is probably going to retire, I would assume. Foster Moreau is, from LSU, came back to the team after he suffered, I think, cancer. Beat that, came back to play for the New Orleans Saints, kind of the team that he trusts and wants to play for. That was a different coaching staff than this one, but he's 29 years old. It's not like he's going to sign for a lot of money. They have Juwan Johnson. They could just run it back with those tight ends. They could also look at it as, Moreau could look for a change of scenery with that new coaching staff. And they could look at it and say, yeah, I mean, Juwan Johnson, like I said, is a decent pass catcher, but we need to upgrade blocking and we need to start to reinvent the tight end room. So tight end could be a need for the New Orleans Saints. You look at their offensive line, I don't see them doing anything with Ruiz or McCoy. So they have 2 of their interior spots, center and right guard. And then their tackles, I really liked what Kelvin Banks did as a rookie. Fuaga's only issue through 2 seasons has been injury on the right side. So they simply need a left guard, and then their offensive line will be set. Like I said, I think Carl Granderson's a good rotational rusher. I think Chase Young's a great edge rusher. I think they move on from Cameron Jordan so they could add some depth and add another pass rusher that if they could add a starter across from Young and move Granderson into that third edge rusher role, I just think they're so much better off there. And then it'll be really interesting to see what they think of their defensive interior because Godchow, Shepard, Brian Brees, they're all signed and but they all only have 1 year left. And all of them could easily be moved, not only this season, but moving forward. Brees was a first round pick from the last regime. Godchow's just a nose tackle. So they could obviously shake around this group. They could also just run it back because, you need to go get receiver. You need to go get edge rusher. Those are premium positions. So maybe they're looking at, we're not going to get a heap of needs. We're going to get a big name edge rusher and a big name receiver because we're taking a shot at the NFC South next season. So they kind of just run it back along their interior because they're only signaling a few specific needs here. Because then Demario Davis is a free agent and you couldn't really see him anywhere else, but he's 37 years old. So it may very well just be the end for Demario Davis. When you look at the Saints, they have Pete Warner and then Danny Stutzman, who looked fine in his limited role as a rookie. You'd assume, like I said, if you're the Saints and you think you have a shot here with Tyler Shuck entering that second season, head coach entering that second season, you really want to, like I said, kind of go for swings here. You could get by with Pete Warner and Danny Stutzman and not, have like this isn't a big roster rebuild or anything. So then you look at cornerbacks and you say Kool-Aid McKinstry and Quincy Riley. I talked about they both have upside. And then Alontae Taylor's a free agent. So it'd be really interesting to see what they do with him. I could see them cutting Justin Reed. I could also see them cutting him or keeping him because they don't save a lot. But they have Jordan Howden. They have Jonas Sanker. I think Sanker is a quality starter. Howden has not shown that yet, which is why they may keep Reed. And even if they cut Reed, they may look to invest in the mid rounds at a safety who could compete with Jordan Howden to start. So safety isn't completely ironed out. And I wonder what's going to happen with slot because Alontae Taylor obviously came from a different defensive coaching staff, but he was obviously still pretty good this season. But that slot role would be in high demand in free agency. He could see himself in a bidding war. I could see the Saints not wanting to participate in a bidding war for a pretty good slot cornerback, but not an elite slot cornerback. But I could see a lot of teams really liking Alontae Taylor, so I could see him getting away in free agency. So moving on to my questions for this year and some of my needs. Like I said, wide receiver, left guard, edge are the big needs. Tight end depends on what you want to do and how you feel about it. Slot and safety depend on what you want to do and how you want to handle it. But like I said, if this is a team that's thinking that, hey, our defense was excellent to finish the season last year. We really like our cornerback room. Chase Young broke out and was great. We feel confident about our linebackers. We just need one big edge rusher who could really make that domino effect and change the way this group looks. And then we need one big wide receiver that could, complement Olave. And all of a sudden now our boy has some passing, weapons. They're obviously going to tinker with some other needs. Like I said, they need a starter at left guard. But and then maybe add some depth at tight end, maybe add some depth along the interior, or draft somebody in the mid rounds that could be future because these guys are running out of steam. But I think wide receiver and edge, if you can nail those down and then nail a starting left guard, which maybe isn't as much capital, but I think it's going to take a lot of what they have in them to get a wide receiver and edge nailed down. And then those are my big needs for them. So my questions are, can they trade Spencer Rattler this offseason, or will he be the backup? Kind of talked about that. I think if they could get anything for him, I would do it. Can they extend Chris Olave, and who will be a notable pass catcher starting next to him? I think they need to have a starting pass catcher next to him. Who starts at left guard? That's going to be the question because all other four spots are locked down. Is it time to move on from some of these aging veterans? Cam Jordan, Demario Davis, Taysom Hill. I don't think any of those three are going to be back when I come back and do this in May. And then is Alontae Taylor going to start in the slot, or is that the only position in the secondary they need to shuffle? So that's going to be it for the 8th overall pick. I'll look back in May, see how those questions shook out. And we'll see how things go. So I'm Parker Hurley. Check me out tomorrow. I'm going to do the 9th overall pick, and we're just going to keep buzzing through this. So leave any comments, any questions, anything like that. We'll talk to you guys later.